Unit 5, Section 1, Part 2. Horrible Histories of Rome. Rome, sweet Rome. Legend says that Romulus and Remus were two brothers raised by wolves. When they were grown up, Romulus killed his brother and became the first king of Rome. The truth is that the people who founded Rome were farmers living in a region called Latium. At first, Rome was ruled by kings. The worst and last was Tarquinius Superbius, famous for his cruelty. The Romans soon got rid of him. The Romans decided to rule themselves and call this a republic. Now, anyone who could have a voice in running the country, well, anyone rich, that is. The new republic was surrounded by enemies. But the Roman army ate enemies for breakfast. Before long, the Romans had conquered the people of Italy, Spain, Greece, and Carthage. The treasures plundered from the new empire flooded into Rome and straight into the hands of the rich. This led to struggles between the poor who wanted power and the rich who didn't want to share it with them. This was where Julius Caesar came in. He was posh, but he stood up for ordinary folks. Caesar was also a great general, and this made him popular. In fact, he was so popular that people wanted him to rule Rome on his own. Many senators, elected politicians, thought that a dictator for life was a lot like a king, and this was the last thing that they wanted. So they decided to stab Caesar in the back. What it really meant was civil war. Generals and politicians fought for power. The winner was Caesar's nephew, who ended up being Caesar's adopted son, Octavian. He took control of Rome and showed the senators who was boss. Octavian made himself emperor and changed his name to Augustus, which means very important person. He merged all the lands Rome controlled into a mighty empire. The thing the Romans had feared, ruled by one all-powerful man, had returned. Some of the emperors that followed Augustus were good, some were bad, and some were stark raving bonkers. On the following pages, get the lowdown on the maddest and baddest of the rotten rulers. Romans run a riot. By 500 BC, the people of Rome had gotten rid of their bullying kings. Instead, they decided to be ruled by a council of posh blokes, the Senate, and live in a republic. Proper Roman history starts here. Rome was surrounded by enemies, but the Romans were tough fighters and conquered their surrounding cities and tribes. Pretty soon, they controlled all of Italy. The Romans' first real challenge came from the city of Carthage in North Africa. Both Rome and Carthage wanted to control the Mediterranean Sea, and before long, war broke out. Carthage's secret weapon was their mighty general Hannibal. Hannibal led his army and its elephants into Italy, where he rampaged around, squashing any Romans that got in his way. The Romans couldn't beat Hannibal in Italy, so they sent an army to attack Carthage. Hannibal rushed home, only to be crushed by the Romans. The war was over. With Carthage no longer a threat, Rome celebrated its victory by taking over Greece, Spain, and parts of North Africa. The Roman generals became heroes to their soldiers and the ordinary Roman people. The generals found that they were the ones with the real power. After all, they could make the Senate do whatever they wanted. The generals started arguing with each other, and these arguments turned into wars, with Romans battling Romans. This could get very confusing. Things got very violent and messy. It was murder, mayhem, and rioters rampaging throughout Rome. To make things worse, a gladiator called Spartacus started a huge slave rebellion, and the slaves rampaged across Italy, looting and killing. Pompey and Crassus then joined forces with a young politician named Julius Caesar. Together they took control of Rome by bullying the Senate. The Senate gave Caesar an army, and he marched off to battle Rome's enemies. He conquered all of France and even invaded England and Germany. When he got back to Rome, his conquests had made him rich, famous, and popular. Pompey and the Senate were teensy-weensy bit jealous. Pompey declared war on Caesar, but Caesar beat Pompey and took control of Rome. And there wasn't a thing the Senate could do about it. Julius had it all, plus a fancy new girlfriend, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. But Jules and Cleo weren't popular with everyone. The plotting politicians in the Senate wanted to get rid of Julius Caesar. On March 15, 44 BC, they ambushed Caesar and stabbed him 23 times. He died. Julius Caesar's adopted son Octavian and his old pal Mark Antony tracked down and killed his murderers. They then turned on each other. By the time Mark Antony had nicked his dead pal's girlfriend, Cleopatra. In the end, Octavian beat Antony and Cleopatra. He renamed himself Augustus and became Rome's first emperor. He finally brought peace and order to Rome. Of the emperors who followed, some were good, many were bad, and lots were bonkers. The empire kept growing as the Romans went around civilizing barbarian tribes. This was just a fancy term for attacking them and taking their land. Soon, the rotten Roman Empire was massive. Rome controlled lands from Britain to Syria and from France to Egypt. Not bad for what was once a small city. Imperial Rumpus. The Roman Republic ran into trouble when General Julius Caesar seized power. Caesar made himself the boss until a mob of jealous senators assassinated him. Then Caesar's nephew, Augustus, killed the killers and became Rome's first emperor. Augustus brought peace and lots of new buildings. When Augustus died in AD 14, things looked to be rosy for Rome. The ADs just had to be as good. Augustus set up a system to make the empire work well. This was a good job because the next emperors were pretty barmy. Crazy Caligula even said he would have his horse into a council. Rome's huge empire brought lots of slaves and cash. Posh people spent it buying big farms and used the slaves to work on them. This left lots of ordinary Romans without homes or jobs. To keep the common people from causing any trouble, the ingenious emperors gave them free food and gory games, bread and circuses. The rich had all of Rome's home comforts, but the poor proles lived in cramped blocks of flats that often collapsed or caught fire. Not only the proles had problems. The last ruler from Augustus' family was Nero, but after Rome burnt down, he was a zero. Rome's top soldiers, the Praetorian Guards, tried to pick a new emperor who'd pay them more. There were 4 different emperors in a single year. Even nature turned nasty. The volcano Vesuvius erupted and pummeled Pompeii with red-hot pumice stones. Rome kept adding land in the ADs. After Emperor Trajan bashed Dacia, the empire was at its most enormous ever. But a big empire meant big borders for barbarians to barge across. Emperor Marcus Aurelius had his work cut out keeping them out. Marcus fancied himself a bit of a thinker, but his son, Commodus, wanted to be a gladiator. More attacks by barbarians meant more soldiers were needed, and this meant more taxes. Of course, it was the poor who paid. Meanwhile, a pestilent plague wiped out thousands. So the emperor, Caracalla, gave everybody in the empire Roman citizenship. It looked generous, but it actually meant they had to pay more taxes. To keep people happy, the emperor laid on more exotic and grisly games, but more gore soon became a bore. Everything started to fall apart again. The pesky Praetorian Guards kept killing emperors and choosing new ones. Then, rebel generals fought uncivil wars to be emperor for 50 years. When Diocletian came to power, he decided that the empire was too big to be ruled by one man, so why not cut it in 2? The Roman Empire in the east and the Roman Empire on the west. But Rome was still on the ropes. Fighting off invaders cost so much money that tax went to the max. People ran away from their homes to avoid paying. One solution was to bring barbarians into the Roman army. When Constantine was sole emperor, he made Christianity the top religion. Christians went from being thrown to the lions anymore, but it was still carry on cruelty at the games. Constantine decided to move the imperial capital from Rome to the east to end of the empire, so he had a new city built, a sort of Rome from home. While the Western Empire got battered by barbarians, Constantinople, the new capital of the empire on the west, kept going for thousands of years. And that's another story.